Online for Authors. I'm chatting with Sarah Seltzer, author of The Singer Sisters. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am super excited. It was a great book. I really enjoyed it. But before we really dive in, can you give like a very quick elevator pitch for our readers? What are they going to get when they open up this cover?
They are going to get a family saga, but make it folk and rock music. So it's two generations of artists in one family who are musically gifted. And the first generation is in the 1960s. It's the folk era. It's Cambridge. It's Greenwich Village. Women with guitars, kind of trying to be a female Bob Dylan. And then the second generation is the children of one of the main characters who are, it's the 1990s, it's rock and roll, it's Lilith Fair, and it's all about using music as a way to explore these relationships between parents, children, aunts, and what our parents' legacy is and what they leave us, and trying to make your own way in a world where your parents' generation has made a big mark, right? So the 60s, the 60s were such a hugely influential decade. So what happened to the children of the 60s luminaries?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Where did the idea come from?
It came from, I went to a couple of big folk concerts quite a while ago. One was Pete Seeger's 90th birthday concert at Madison Square Garden in New York City, where all these wonderful blues and folk and bluegrass singers and rock came out, and they were doing these sort of classic songs. And I noticed a family group or two, but particularly the Wainwright McGarrigle family. That's the sisters are Kate and Anna McGarrigle. They had a folk group. They're Canadian, and in the 60s and 70s. And Kate's children are Rufus and Martha Wainwright, who were artists that were my generation, kind of.
Okay.
And Kate like brought them out to sing these like folk songs with her, and she's like, "Sing out, children," you know. And I recognized their voices because I'd heard been listening to their albums, and I was like, "Oh, they're here. This is so sweet." And then, very sadly, a few years later, when Kate died, my husband and I went to her memorial concert, which was also in New York. And really, at that concert, they were going through her catalog. And their own catalog, and I realized how many of the songs that they were singing were all about each other, songs about divorce and motherhood, and and loss, and some of them are fun songs, remembering happy times. And I was like, wow, imagine the family business being songwriting, and everyone's songs, and everyone's songs being about each other, and how intense that might be. And I didn't end up starting the book for many years after that. I think like 5 or 6 years, but I had the idea like sort of in my pocket. And then when it was the right time, I started writing it.
I like how you do that. It's how I do it. I'll be doing just real life, and something will happen, and I'll think, what if? Or I wonder what it would be like if, that kind of
exactly.
thing. And it just brings it up. So as I was reading, I noticed like you tackled a lot in this book. We've got like generational expectations. We've got family secrets. We've got addiction. We've got mental health issues. We've got unplanned pregnancies, adoption, abortion. Was that the plan from the beginning? Like, did you say to yourself, I'm going to like tackle some big issues, or did that just happen more organically?
It happened more organically. I actually started with the music. So I started kind of the first draft was so much about like who was writing what kind of songs, and having success or no success with them over the entire period of the novel. And what, the songs were about. And it kind of came from that, all the issues that they were dealing with. And what's crazy is when you list all the things that the book tackles, which it does very much, I went in between, let's say, drafts like 3 and 5, I went back and read a bunch of memoirs of actual musicians. And if I put some of the stuff that was in those memoirs in the novel, people would say, no way, this is way too dramatic. This is way too soap opera-y. This is crazy. They like being held up at gunpoint at a rock club. And like, there's so much. These people's lives were legitimately so crazy. And part of it is that artists and musicians do have some, are in these elevated circles where a lot of things are happening and there's a lot of drama. But part of it is when I went to a book club with some lovely senior citizens in the suburbs of New York, and a couple of them are like, this is just life. Like over the course of 3 generations, like these issues are going to come up for almost all of us. And, we're not going to write rock songs about them, but we are going to deal with them. So I think part of it is just like if you have a big enough family, everyone's going to be dealing with something at some point.
Well, yeah, and I've thought of that too, because, I think to myself all the time, something crazy will happen and I'll think, gosh, I don't want to be living a Jerry Springer life.
Exactly.
Like how crazy is this? And yet, when I talk with friends, I realize, well, they have very similar things going on.
Yeah.
And it isn't that every day, all day is this craziness. It's that over, I'm 61 years old. In 61 years, I can tell you some stories.
Exactly.
And I've lived a relatively sheltered life.
Right. Exactly.
And not the life of a star that tends to have there's a lot more action going on in their lives. They have less time to sit around at home and, bake cookies and do nothing.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, are your characters like based on people or do you find yourself in any of the characters, or is this truly just made up out of nowhere?
I would say that they are all loosely inspired by not one, but kind of several actual figures from the music scene, with a little bit of me and my family in there, but mostly, they mostly evolve pretty organically. So, Judy, her name is Judy, there's, and that's sort of a nod to like Joan Baez and Judy Collins and Joni Mitchell. There are all these J names,
right,
in that scene in the 60s. So, but she's also, there's a little Carole King and Cass Elliot in there. And then Emma, I was definitely thinking about like Ani DeFranco, and who, is sort of an independent artist. And then like Alanis Morissette was this huge star when I was a teenager, with these angry songs. So that was kind of the idea. Like I just had this idea of Emma as like this angry combat boot wearing, but like a rebel without a cause a little bit, because like she's angry, but like, what is she angry about? Right. But that was definitely the vibe at the time. And of course, looking back on it, like I think a lot of people, women in the 90s were angry because things still weren't amazing for women, but it wasn't explicitly stated. It was like anger as a vibe.
Right. Exactly.
So that's kind of where they both sort of evolved from those ideas rather than particular people. And but I think their conflicts they both have sort of conflicts between family loyalty and motherhood and caring for their family and the art, and that certainly comes from the women in my family and the other women that I know, and that sort of conversations we've had about those conflicts.
Right.
Yeah.
The family dynamics were so intense, and like we see Judy and her daughter Emma, and we see all of this angst and this trying to pull away, and when you see it from both sides, you can actually really see both sides. You did a great job, because you can see from Emma's point of view where she's just disgusted with her mother, and she has all of these examples as to why. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see it from Judy's point of view, and you think, but she was being a loving mother.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and as a mom of adult children now, right, I think to myself all the time, gosh, I did the best I could do. And for some of my kids, it really worked well. And for some, not as much. Yeah. I have 4 children.
Right.
And I have varying states of success, even though I feel like I did the same thing.
Right.
And it's like, what did they see? What did they need? What were they going through? What was I going through at the same time?
Yeah.
Right. And all of that kind of plays in the book.
Right. So. Exactly. And I think part of Emma's journey is kind of realizing that her mom is just a person, because her mom is this legend, and, and so she's sort of seduced by that idea too. She's like, where my mom is this legend, and like, why wasn't she shining her light on me? And then kind of as the book goes on, she comes to, and she experiences fame and ups and downs. She kind of comes to realize, like, my mom was just a person muddling through.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
doing the best she could.
Emma seems very disappointed in her mom at times.
Yeah.
Right. Because she's like, mom was so famous, and then she just gave it up, and now she's a school teacher.
Yeah.
She's teaching music.
Yeah.
How stupid. Why would she waste her life like that?
Right.
And then on the other hand, why wasn't she always there for me? And why?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think, part of it is there is this family secret, or some family secrets. And then Emma senses that, and she can't articulate it because she doesn't know. So she knows that there's something missing or something wrong with her mom. Right. And she uses these kind of everyday complaints about her mother as her outlet. But what she's really sensing is that there's something she hasn't been told. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What do you think, your own opinion about family secrets? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Family secrets, they can really ruin things.
I think that most people I know who've experienced this, like the whole idea of there being a big family secret, often will say they sensed something, like there was like that it was always there, even when it wasn't told or out in the open. In the magazine I work for, we ran a whole issue called Secrets and Revelations. That was all these essays about family secrets. And it kind of comes up over and over again that, the secret is always kept to protect usually the younger generation, that to shield them from pain, but that the younger generation, families, these things that the younger generation feels it anyway. But on the other hand, I think it's hard because if something, one of the ways that people cope with trauma is they just like push it down in our society. And I think it can be hard to ask people to dredge it back up, particularly with their children when they feel really raw. So I think, the reason it's so fertile and so many novels and films, and TV series like have family secrets in them is because it is like a part of most families' story, or at least their history,
Right.
I think in my family, there's definitely some, over the years, these stories kind of trickled out, like particularly in the era before abortion was legal, and when there were different standards for women. So like there was one great aunt who had a secret abortion, and there was one great aunt who gave up a baby for adoption, and like none of these were my mom or my grandma, but the stories kind of came down to me eventually, and I was like, oh my gosh, wow, they went through it. They really did.
Right. Well, my grandparents, supposedly my dad was born 2 months early.
Right.
No, he was not.
Right.
He was a 7-pound baby.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
he didn't go to a NICU. He was perfectly fine.
Right.
And for their entire life, they lived, they were married over 60 years. So this should be a beautiful thing. They never celebrated their anniversary because we didn't talk about when they got married. Right. Because they got married because she was pregnant.
Right.
And so we can't, but that whole thing, we they never had a 50th. They never had a 60th.
Wow.
And how sad is that?
Yeah, it is. Right.
Like they were still protecting my dad.
Right.
Who was a 60-year-old man
who
already knew the answer. Right.
Exactly. Right. And I think, what you're saying is so true. Like the way these secrets kind of take a life of their own.
Right.
And eventually like the secret becomes keeping the secret becomes like so important and like sacred almost. And what, even though people may even know the
truth. Everybody knew the truth. And we all just kind of walked around going, all right, I guess that's what's going to happen. So I'm curious, of all the characters in the book, who was your favorite?
Well, the most fun character to write was Sylvia. Sylvia is the aunt of Emma and the sister of Judy, and she kind of comes in. I had her as sort of this refreshing outside voice where she's, she has her own problems. She's very glamorous. She's lesbian and closeted, but she sort of has she's sort of got it figured out. And she also just sort of comments, from the perspective of an aunt and a sister on the sort of really intense mother-daughter dynamic between Judy and Emma. So she was sort of the most delightful to write. I think, people find Emma really difficult. I loved writing her also. Her parts came very easy to me because it was the 90s and I lived through the 1990s, and, writing like an angry kind of bratty 20-year-old in the 90s was not a stretch for me, and it just was sort of fun to play it up. So I also I found those parts like very, very delightful to write as well. Yeah.
Which was the hardest character?
I think, Judy. Judy goes through so much pain, and so I think that was, that was difficult to write in part, and to access because so much of her pain is caused by like the social expectations of the time, right? And the expectations that she'd be like this very good and proper woman, and what she really wants to do is go out and play rock and roll and like change the world, and so that's not something I've experienced. I'm a millennial. We were encouraged to go out and change the world.
Right.
Too much encouraged as a generation. And so that was, having to kind of go back and access a really different mentality was interesting and challenging.
Right. Other than a great story, which it is, and people are going to read it and enjoy it, what do you hope they take away from it as they're walking away from this book?
I think that I hope that they take away this idea that parent-child relationships in general actually have this, are idealized by our society, particularly for mothers, and the sacrifice that mothers should make. And as you said, really, the message is just that it's not a role that you can be perfect at.
Right.
That, it is a role that is done by flawed human beings, and that we put a lot of weight on it as individuals and as a society, and that at the end of the day, it's fun. There's a sort of fundamental flaw there that we have to accept,
right,
to reconcile ourselves and to grow up. That's part of growing up.
Well, and I've told people a million times, there wasn't a manual. You don't get a manual with each kid that says this kid's going to need this thing at this time, right?
Exactly.
You're guessing, you're making it up, and really, you're in your 20s, you're having children. Well, in your 20s, you're not even fully grown yet. Your brain is still developing. You're still trying to figure out your own self, let alone what are you going to do with a child now, and it's like, oh, great, we're both growing up together. And it's, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
I for a while, my relationship with my mom was strained. And I finally realized, she did the best she could. And how do I know that? Because I did the best I could, right? Exactly. And I made a bazillion mistakes. And it isn't for lack of trying or for lack of love or caring. It was just because I was where I was and doing what I could do.
Yeah. It's so interesting how becoming a parent also makes you,
changes everything.
Changes everything and appreciates it. It's so funny because so much of what you do as a parent is consciously try to be different from how you were parented.
Yes.
Also, it makes you appreciate how you were parented. Like,
exactly.
Thinking of all the energy my parents put in to parenting us, and all the, because I'm kind of a parent who doesn't, before 11 a.m. on the weekends, I'm like, you're on your own, children. Like, I'll sit here and read the newspaper. And, they were up and at it with, going to soccer games and taking us on bike rides. And I'm just like, that was amazing. Like, they must have been so tired from the work week. And like, good, that was really lovely. So there's little things that you realize that were a bigger effort from them than you realized at the time.
Yeah. I've gone back to my own mom and thanked her for things and apologized for things. After becoming a mom, it was like, oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. Yeah. All those times that I did or said, like, I get it now. I get it. So yeah, how funny. So let's talk a little bit about your writing style. Are you a pantser, a plotter? Do you write every day? Do you have, are you real strict about things? Where do you fall on all that continuum?
I'm kind of fall in the middle on a lot of those things. So I am, I would say I'm not a detailed plotter. I did kind of have an outline that I was continually revising while I wrote this, because, and it wasn't even an outline for the whole novel. It was sort of an outline for each section. And then when I would have new ideas, I would change the outline. So what I did have some notes for myself. And then in terms of writing every day, so I say for pantser versus plotter, I'm like a half pantser, half plotter.
Yeah.
And then for writing every day, I can't write. So I have a day job and I have 2 kids. And while I wrote this, I had one baby, but then I got pregnant with the other in the middle. And so I try to just block out certain times that are writing times. In fact, and I have a friend that I sometimes meet. I'm going to meet her after we chat, and we do a couple hours on Fridays of writing together. And then I sometimes will say, when I'm really in the middle of a project, I'll go off on the weekends for just, go to the library for a few hours. So it's more about finding those chunks of time. And when I'm drafting and I'm really into it, I can even write on my lunch break. I was taking a writing class when I was really at the very beginning of this manuscript, and I don't know if people know New York City, but I live in Harlem, and the writing class was in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is way out in Brooklyn. It was an hour on the train.
Wow, that's
on the
that is
subway. It was like
long.
50
Yeah.
minutes. It was like 50 minutes. It was a straight shot, which was amazing. So I could always get a seat. I had a notebook and I was like, I have an hour. I'm going to just,
You might
draft.
as well use it, right?
Yeah. And I'm going to, be at this, the fact that I had a writing class at the other end meant that I was in that mode. So I did do a lot of drafting. I did some drafting on the subway, which is amazing. Now I'm like, how did I do that? But I think that the routine kind of follows what the project is in some ways, that I come with a new routine. And I know your listeners and you probably feel the same way, that you can't always, you have to have some kind of routine and some kind of way of motivating yourself, but you also have to be able to change that as your life changes and as your work changes.
Yeah, I'm way more of a pantser, and I am way more. I tell people that I'm a binge writer. So I will think about things. I'm usually thinking about writing all day long. Little thoughts are going through. I might be trying out a scene in my head and realize that isn't going to go anywhere. And I'm doing a lot of things like that. And then all of a sudden it'll kind of gel in my mind. And I'll think, oh, I know what I want to do. Now I've got to write. And when I am binge writing, get out of the way. I'm not gonna help you with your dinner. I'm not going to do any clothes. I'm just gonna, and I write and I write and I write. I'm at a stage though, I don't have little kids at home.
Right.
My husband passed away in January.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. But that leaves, I'm really very much here doing me.
Right.
And so when I get a binge write moment,
there's nothing.
There's nothing that stops me. I've tried the writing everyday routine because people tell me, this is such a good, it's terrible for me. I feel it becomes very chore-like.
Right.
And then I'm not enjoying myself. And the whole reason I write is because I love it.
Exactly. I always say it's like exercise. You have to find, you have to trick yourself into doing it. And even though writing makes you feel good and exercise makes you feel good, if it starts feeling like an obligation,
then it's no fun anymore.
And I think, my kids have helped me understand that. Cause like, you tell them brush your teeth right now, they'll immediately be like, no,
right.
You have to brush your teeth. Or it's like, oh, like who wants to brush their teeth first? And like, let's chat about coding or Minecraft while we brush our teeth. Suddenly it's no big deal. So that's what we have to do with ourselves. And I find it so funny that I have to do that with writing. Cause I'm like, writing is right. As you said, it's my favorite thing.
Right.
It gives me so much joy. And yet I have to trick myself into doing it.
Well, like you said, find a friend. You go out with a friend.
Make it fun. Have some coffee. You
block time and you do these other things. One of the
make it a treat. Yeah.
One of the things that really works for me is I like going out.
Me too.
And I like going on a retreat where I can get away from my home. It's very difficult. This is my office. I love my office. It's painted yellow. It's my favorite
lovely,
color.
By the way.
I have ocean pictures all around. It's very me, and yet I have trouble writing here.
Yeah.
Even though I've created this space for myself, and the reason that it's so hard is because life is sitting right outside that door.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
But when I go on a retreat or I leave my home, my life is no longer up in my business, and then all of a sudden my mind opens up and it's like, oh, look at me. Right. So,
I did. Yeah. I'm so similar that way. And it's really funny because my husband is, a writer and editor too. And he can totally create that environment at home in a way that I can never have. Like he'll just close the door and tell everyone to kind of leave him alone. And I can't do that. I have to, if it's, I only have a few hours, it's a library or a coffee shop. And if I can, I will absolutely do. I'll even do a 24-hour retreat sometimes to do edits.
Just to get away from the house.
Yeah, and to be. I mean, the beauty of a hotel room or a retreat center where there's nothing that you own on the. Like it's true. Like it's great to be away from your own posters and your own bookshelf, because all those things sort of call to mind your obligations and your.
Right. Well, and as a mom, and you have younger children. So as a mom with the younger children, the idea that they need you. And so you're in a room with the door closed and you hear a commotion outside of that door. I don't know.
Exactly.
Well, maybe there are mothers who can. I don't know many mothers who can ignore that and continue doing the creative thing without getting up to check on it. And once I've gotten up to check on it, now the flow's gone.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So what are you writing next, Sarah?
Well, I am working on a new novel, but it's in very early, sort of embryonic I would say it's sort of it's a draft, but it's in like an embryonic draft. And it is, this novel is so much about family. Right. That I wanted to do one that explored friendship and romance more. So that's what I will say about it. So it's a little bit, the mood board is a little bit like a little Jane Austen, a little, the Before Midnight movies. Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful. So
wonderful. Do you have any kind of timeline? Any time that you can tell your fans when you're going to have something else coming out?
No timeline yet.
No timeline.
But I'm hoping to make some real progress over the summer. Well, with the the longer days, and, more relaxed schedule.
So, hey guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. Look for the post. Tell us something you liked or loved about this podcast, and you'll have a chance to win a digital copy of Sarah's book, The Singer Sisters. So, Sarah, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, talk with you about the book, talk with you about writing, ask questions, how do they do that? How do they get in touch?
I am on Instagram is probably the social media I use the most for the book. On Instagram, I'm Sarah with an H, M Seltzer on all the social media sites. So, so I'm on Instagram. I have that site is pretty much dedicated to my writing, and I'm also on Blue Sky now, and on Facebook. So you can kind of find me at any of those places. And my website is just sarahmseltzer.com, and it has all that information on it as well.
Super. And I'll have all that in the show notes, guys. So it'll be easy to find Sarah. Run right out, grab her book, The Singer Sisters. It is fabulous. I enjoyed it. I laughed. I cried. I got angry a few times. I was a little ticked at Emma a few times. Shake her. But that's what we're supposed to want to do. So it was perfect. It was perfect. And it's a great book. When you read it, and I want you to read it, make sure that you go and review it, because we can all use those reviews. So
Thank
Sarah,
you. That's lovely.
Thank you so much for being on. And thank you for being here today. It's really wonderful.
It's been great. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.